And if everyone can see it, Fiona's latest book is underneath there. If you could open by telling us about it, please, Fiona.
Tell you about it. Well, so it is the story of a couple, two parents who are stabbed to death in what is one of the most kind of infamous double murders of the modern age. And their 10-year-old daughter is arrested and convicted for their murder. And basically, 21 years on, a documentary team are trying to kind of cover the story, I suppose, of the anniversary, and they track down her older sister who has never spoken publicly about this brutal double murder, and then that prompts a whole kind of, I don't know, just there have serious repercussions. And yeah, basically the story unfolds and all is not what it seems, and that's all I will say. But I absolutely loved writing it. It was kind of one of the main characters is a tabloid journalist, which was what I used to do. So I found it a lot easier writing that than I did writing the story of a police officer. And it kind of explores the idea of, whether, we are ever able to, I suppose, truly, are we responsible for what we do when we're younger, and kind of the repercussions of that and how they affect you in later life. So yeah, it's kind of got a politician, it's got a corrupt politician in it. It's got the idea about whether, prisoners should be rehabilitated or not, or whether they should face strict sentences. It explores the idea of young people in kind of, young persons, offenders, institutions, that kind of thing. And yeah, there's a lot of kind of themes that interest me. This idea of the kind of shades of grey, I suppose, that no one is ever truly evil, or are they?
Yeah. Whilst I wait for Antonia's book to pop in, I'll explain why I've got you both on today, because it's a little bit different to the usual. It's because last Thursday, both of your books were supposed to be published. But unfortunately, it's been delayed until when was it?
It's out in April 2021 now. I think it's the 22nd of April. Yeah, so hopefully it won't get moved again. It was, a decision I know the publishers thought really carefully about. But they decided on balance. I think lots of books had moved to this date. I couldn't really do that much promotional kind of activity, and I think they just took a view that they were going to move it. So yeah, which is it's really, I felt very wistful on Thursday, put it that way. But there is an upside, which is I have got longer to write my current work in progress, because I was due to deliver that, later on this year. And obviously with the pandemic, I've had 2 children at home. It's just been very distracting. I haven't perhaps written quite as much as I might have liked. So it gives me a bit more time from that point of view.
Yeah. If you could explain what the silk collar is, please, Antonia, for the audience.
Yes, so hello everyone. This is my 4th book and 4th in the series that I've been writing. The first one came out in 2014, and it's based around my main character Tom Hawkins and his partner Kitty, and they, by the 4th one, have sort of settled into kind of domestic, I wouldn't call it bliss, but domestic something, and and they so it all seems to be going quite well for them, which of course is never going to last in a crime novel. And basically what happens is Tom is walking through the streets of London one day and gets set upon by a gang of thieves who he just assumes have come to sort of rob him. But actually it turns out that there's a price on his head, and he doesn't know why. He has quite a lot of people who don't like him or enemies, and he writes up a chart of who it could possibly be, but he can't really work out, who it is. So the novel really starts with him trying to work out, what it is that he's done. that could be so bad that someone would want dead, without too much twists along the way. And we realised that actually, whatever Tom has done, it's also very much intertwined with Kitty's previous life that now has been quite opaque, and that there are some very dark elements to her story that come to be told in this episode. And running alongside that, there's also a new character called Jeremiah Patience, who the novel actually starts with, who is an escaped slave, and he is desperately searching for his daughter, who's basically been stolen from him. And all of their stories come together, and they're all basically after the same person, really. So it's.
When I was reading about your books, Antonia, I thought I loved the name of all the characters. They've got such good names. I was like, they are so cool, because I love names as well. I collect names. I wondered if you did something similar, because your names are really kind of unusual and distinctive.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I do love coming up with names, and Jeremiah in particular, he came up with his own name. He had a first name, but he actually came up with Patience as a name to sort of resonate with himself about what what was going on in his life, and what he needed to do to get through it, and to achieve what he needed to achieve. So but yeah, I love a good name, and then of course there are the real characters as well. Sometimes every so often in the book there'll be a real person, and their names are often sort of quite surprising too. I don't know, they sort of seem very fitting.
Yeah, I think your names are so fitting of the time as well. I don't know, they've just got that kind of old-fashioned charm to them.
Unfortunately, one seems to be called Thomas. There's only seem to be about 3 first names. If you're not careful, you can end up everyone. It's a bit, it's a bit like Hilary Mantel had that problem with her laters, because so many people called Thomas, and of course she's writing about real people. Yeah. Which Thomas are we talking about now?
Yeah, your names in your opening novel are a bit unusual, Fiona, weren't they?
Yes. So in Rattle, I had, well, my kind of one of my main characters was called Erdman. And I think the reason for that was because I was looking for, I just wanted to have characters who, I think if your characters have distinctive names, it makes them more memorable in some ways. And also often there's a meaning behind the names of my characters. So like Erdman he was kind of my representative of everyman, and I came across him. I often get names from the credits in in TV shows and things, and my daughter and I had watched, I think it was Cinderella or something, and Erdman Penner was the name of one of the producers, and I really liked it. So he was my kind of, I suppose, everyman, I suppose. And then Saul, who's another character of mine, he means gift from God, I think. So I do look into names and their meanings. Quite a lot, actually, or I collect them. So I've got a Wild Eve. One of my detectives is called Wild Eve, and that was taken actually from my sister-in-law has a friend whose daughter's called Wild Eve, and I believe that came from a Thomas Hardy book. So yeah, anything that I hear, if you've got an unusual name, I squirrel it away, and then I find a character who I think it will suit.
Yeah, the reason that I managed to decide to put you together today was because I realised the similarities between your novels that people wouldn't kind of automatically assume. Like the characters, because you both have really important villains. What's important about getting a good villain in a book?
You want to take that first, Fiona?
You want me to? Yeah. Yeah, I think. Sorry, I'm getting used to the technology, and look, I'm in and out of the screen. I'm going to try and sit still. I can't keep still. Important, I think. For me, writing the types of books that I do, often featuring serial killers or characters with extremely dark motivations, that it's so important to have a villain, if you were your serial killer, whatever shape they take. It's really important that they're memorable because, for me, I've been thinking about this a lot, and plot is obviously it's really, really important. But when I think about the books that I love or the books that have had a profound impression on me, it's always the character I remember rather than the story necessarily. So for me, it's about choosing a character and what they're going to do, but also making sure that they're not a caricature, that they're not a 2D version of what a villain might be. So it's important that they've got a past, that they've got a motivation for doing what they're doing, you know, and that also that, you know, I alluded to it earlier, and I always say this, but it's a thing that really interests me in my writing, is that, you know, shades of grey all the time, because none of us is a wholly perfect or, you know, wholly black of heart. So I think, you know, it's really, really important to do that. And my agent always, when I send her an early draft of something, will scribble all over it. Yes, but why? Why? Because you can't just say someone's going to kill someone. That's come from somewhere. That's, you know, whether it's the person that makes them, you know, things that have happened that make them who they are, you know, or if there's a reason for doing what they're doing. And that's always the most interesting thing, I think, the why. And that's why, you know, for me, it's important to have your villain really stand out. I guess I spend a lot of time layering up my character like that. I don't know if you do the same, Antonia.
Yeah, I mean, character for me is always where I start. And so before I do, well, I do my research kind of into the specific area that I am writing about, but then it's all about character. So I'm writing about, you know, notes about where they are in their life, what they, you know, what their past is, like you were saying, Fiona. With the villain, if you like, specifically, I was thinking there's this wonderful writer called Jane Gardam who says there are no such things as minor characters because no one thinks of themselves as a minor character in life. And I think it's maybe the same with villains. You know, you've got to think of them. They don't think they're villains. You know, and I think if you start from that premise, you know, whoever they are, they don't think they're doing anything wrong necessarily, or at least they can really justify it to themselves. Yeah. What they're doing, and I think that's often quite an interesting way in, because, you know, then you're really coming at it from that, yeah, as you say, Fiona, you know, the why, what is it that's motivating them, and that's not to let them off the hook in any way, but it's a way of exploring why they've got to where they are. The one thing I would say is that with my latest one, the villain in that is probably the darkest character I've written, and is the closest to being purely wicked that I've ever written. And I really, really thought about that quite hard, because, like you, I don't really believe those people. I think they're very rare. I think they're very, very rare, but I think they do exist, or at least I think they're so damaging. They're people who are so damaging that that they're kind of very hard to redeem. And it was quite interesting to explore that, because I've always been so interested in doing the shades of grey, and also taking characters who are so appalling, but then trying to see another side to them. It was quite an interesting thing for me to do the other way, and to go, no, I'm not going to let this person off the hook, really, at all.
Yeah, I like the idea of writing someone who is purely and wholly wicked for no other reason other than they just are. I mean, you can have so much fun with that.
Well, she has some reasons, but they're not good enough reasons. You know, they're not enough to excuse, put it that way, what she does.
Sounds good.
Yeah, the Devil in the Marshalsea was a prime example of that, because you didn't know who the villain was at the start.
Yeah, and some of the people that seemed the most reprehensible actually turned out to be, if not heroes, then anti-heroes, and, you know, yeah, and that's quite fun, because when you do that, I'm sure you do this, Fiona, you can play around a bit with people's expectations, which is always quite fun for a crime novel. You don't want people to go, oh, I know exactly, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've written both, because I certainly, my first two, I would say, were much more whodunits. You know pretty much, or you know really early on who the bad guys are, and you know, you're right in the head, I suppose, of the killer. But my third one, The Neighbour, is much more of a whodunit, I mean, there's quite a large cast of characters with that one, and really for me, I didn't really want people to twig who it was until quite near the end, if I could get away with it. And that is always a challenge, because you don't want to make it so impossible that people say, well, that's just a swizz, but you want to kind of litter it through with clues. But it's hard, isn't it? I mean, so I've written both, and I don't know, my fourth one, When I Was 10, I think that's probably a bit more of a, well, it's a why done it. Yeah, it's more of a why done it, but there are some twists in that one that I can't talk too much about because they'd give it away. But I had great fun writing it. I absolutely loved writing When I Was 10. I mean, that's probably been my most pleasurable writing experience so far, which probably explains why this fifth book is just so awful.
It's difficult. Are you finding? Sorry, Alex, I shouldn't ask questions, but I just.
All right, go for it. Go for it.
Fiona, whether you're finding it more difficult to write in the current circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, considerably more difficult, because at the very start I was just so distracted and obsessed by the news agenda. I mean, and as a kind of former journalist, I'm a news sort of junkie anyway, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I was reading everything. I wasn't doing anything else apart from reading the news all the time. And then the schools went into lockdown, and so I've got a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, so they were both at home, and we were trying to get to grips with the technology for homeschooling. I'm trying to do some homeschooling while also trying to write myself, and I just found, I found it so difficult to write. I found it so difficult to read, and I think at the start, I was actually really frightened, because we didn't really know what was going on, how serious it was going to be. When you hear that your local hospital is building a makeshift mortuary in the car park, it's terrifying. And you're going to the supermarket and you can't get, bread or flour or eggs. So I was so distracted by all of that for a long time. I couldn't write, I couldn't read, which was really, quite devastating for me, because I've always been a massive reader. And so just not being able to read for pleasure at all was really hard. But slowly but surely it's come back, and I've just been writing. I have been writing, but a lot more slowly than I ordinarily would. And now it's the summer holidays, so again, and I always have these kind of, yes, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and do 2 hours of work, and then I wake up and it's like 8 o'clock, and I'm like, oh, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
What about you? Were you able to write?
No, I had quite similar sort of pattern to yours, the one you described. I had the issue of, I'd moved out of, I'd sold my flat in London on the 13th of March, so just before lockdown, and the sale for where I am now hadn't quite gone through. So I was supposed to be in this sort of temporary place down in the south coast in Kent, quite near to where I am now, but just a friend's kind of holiday home, which I was sort of renting. It was supposed to be for a couple of weeks, and it ended up being for 11 weeks because the whole sale kind of froze, basically. So that was quite in itself unsettling.
Quite stressful.
With everything else, yeah. So it's that thing of, I was really lucky because it was a lovely place, and I was, could see the sea from the window. So, I don't want you to feel too sorry for me, but it did make it. It did mean that I like you, I found it just really quite difficult to concentrate. I think there was so much kind of so many stories going on.
Yeah.
That writing another story on top of that, or reading, like you, I found reading quite tricky as well.
I don't really know what I did, to be honest. I think I've just wasted a lot of time, frankly.
No, you were self-compassionate. Love yourself.
Yeah, I found reading has been a real help for me. I've been reading up to 2 to 3 books a week since I first got onto using Audible only instead of the library, because the libraries are closed.
Yeah.
Because it means I've been able to read after midnight, which I wasn't doing before. A bit mental, but yeah.
No,
what have you read that you've liked, Alex?
Well, I managed to read the entire Theakston's 18, so
what? That's amazing.
Most of them were okay. Yeah. And then all the New Blood, and and then I've read a couple of the Bloody Scotland Dark Matter was brilliant because it was so different.
Yeah, I've heard really good things about that. Yeah.
It's been really different as well, because reading for interviews is different for reading for pleasure, because most of the time when I was reviewing before, people didn't know what I was reading and why I was reading it until after I'd already put it on as a review. But now they know beforehand.
Yeah.
It's on a deadline now, so it's a bit different.
Yeah. Oh yeah, deadlines. They're that awful word.
Yeah. It's not been easy, but I've enjoyed it. One thing that I was really interested in when you're talking about children and things and how you cope with lockdown is the characters, because children is both important to both of you both universes, because they're big elements of both books.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose because I have children, it's such an instinctive part of including them in what I do, I guess. And because I suppose, I don't know why I gravitate really towards writing about children. I've had children in all of my books. I think I make it harder for myself because, it's trying to get the tone and the language right, which is tricky. I mean, I suppose what I would say is there seems to be a correlation that as my children get older in real life, they get older in my novels as well. So I suppose I draw on, not on them, but I suppose things they say, the kind of cadence of their speech, the kind of, I don't know, just I suppose the things that they're into. I guess I do use them a little bit, but I think because children are so, they can create such great tension, I think, because you can either be, you can either have children in peril or you can have children as, as criminal, I suppose. And both of those sort of fascinate me. But it was really interesting with the early two books because a lot of people don't like reading about children in peril, as I found out after I'd written. And I had lots of kind of people saying that it was just too dark to write about children being abducted, too dark to write about, children who are in the grip of an horrific serial killer. And people
we might have lost your sound.
Oh, me? Can you still hear me, Alex?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't hear.
Maybe it's me. Maybe I've lost something. I can't hear either of you.
Okay, I'll carry on talking for a minute and hopefully you might come back. The perils of live recording, as we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, I
can hear you, Antonia, so yeah. And the audience can hopefully hear you, so yeah. So I think, I'm just interested, I suppose, as well about children and the way their minds work and, how they have a different view on the world. They have a more, a purer view sometimes. And yeah, they turn up in every one of my books. So I'm writing teenagers at the moment, which is slightly trickier. But I am using kind of advice and guidance from friends of teenagers. Can you hear us yet, Antonia? No, I think, should we carry on, Alex? Yeah, we can carry on. But maybe we can get Caroline to help Antonia out and get her to pop in. And
maybe she should come. Should she log out and log back in again? I could.
Yeah.
Do you want her to log out and log in again? I'll message her.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
If you could.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll do that now, and let's see if she answers. Oh, she's gone. She's going to do it again. Gone. Okay. Well, hopefully she'll log out in and log out. Yeah. So children do feature in my books quite widely, which is, I didn't really think about it, but you're right. They've been in every one of my books. Oh, she's back.
I still can't hear you.
Oh, we can hear you.
You can hear me. I can't hear you.
Yeah. If you could text her the question and then she can answer it. Yeah. We'll do it that way. Yeah.
Okay. So, what do you want to ask her, Alex?
What about the children in her books and why I find those important?
Sorry about this, guys.
Don't worry about it. It's fine.
I could try and answer the question about children in a slightly odd.
I've just messaged you on Twitter. Can you read it? Look at your phone. Live TV, we love it.
I can't see it. I can't see a text from you.
Hang on. I've sent it as a DM. Hang on. I know. Hang on. I haven't got her text.
Right.
Dear.
Hang on. No, that's all good. Hang on. I've sent it. Let's see if she can. I've sent it over. Can you see over Twitter? Hang on. I wonder if she can read the comments.
Yeah. I wonder if Caroline can put it in the comments. I don't know whether she can hear us in the background.
It's very weird because it was all working just fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hang on. Let me just.
This is generally why I've got someone in the background helping me with it, see. But, yeah.
Hang on.
I'm wondering if you two should just carry on the conversation, and I might have to leave and try and come back.
I've sent it to you by DM on Twitter. Oh, here we go. Caroline.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. I'll do that, and then I'll answer the question on children. Then I'll come out and try and come back in again and see if that helps.
Yeah.
So to answer the question, I do. Yeah, one of my main characters is a boy called Sam, who is now 15, but we've been following him from quite a young age through the 4 books. And one of the things that really interests me about him, and to Tom to some extent, because he's still quite a young man, is that when you have characters like that in a series, you're able to explore their development. They're not coming to you fully formed. You know, they're not sort of older grown-ups with all their kind of past experience, and sort of they're learning as the series continues. The things that happen to them in each book have real impact on the way that they develop. And for someone like Sam, who grew up in this incredibly this sort of criminal underworld, basically, his family are kind of absolutely lawless sort of street gang. The books are exploring to some extent how much Sam is a product of his childhood and his family, and is he going to sort of escape from that? There's quite a lot in the book anyway about escape and liberty. So that's in some ways, when you're dealing with a child, particularly over a long series, I think that's quite an interesting thing to explore, because you can really follow the effects of what's happened to them. I hope that I'm going to try and log off and log back on. Have fun without me.
Yeah, we heard it. Yeah. Hopefully you can see now what I mean about similarities, because
yeah, for sure. I mean, I haven't, I mean, Antonia knows I haven't actually, I hadn't read any of her stuff yet, but it sounds amazing. I really want to now, after having a reader, she's such a great writer. I had a look at a couple of her books, and I want to now properly get into her stuff, because it sounds. Can you hear us? No, we can't hear.
That guy. And I'm sorry I couldn't make sense of what you were trying to say to me.
I was saying to you, I sent you a message over the Twitter DM, so that's why I was sending the questions.
Okay. Well, anyway, back again.
Yeah.
It's all good. But no, I mean, I was just singing your praises and saying we've chatted about this, and we're not that familiar with each other's work, but I had a look at Antonia's writing, and it's just so beautiful, but also it's so appealing. That stories sound so great. So now I really want to read her books.
Oh, well, ditto. Except the neighbour. I was saying this to Fiona beforehand, when we were emailing beforehand, is that I'm having just moved into a new place, and that's what the neighbour's all about, right? So yeah. I don't think that's a good idea.
No, maybe not. It's quite dark. What with my books, I always think that they're not that dark, and then people always go, they're so dark, and I'm like, really? I think maybe I'm just naturally a dark person. I think I'm quite sunny natured, really, most of the time.
That too. I have quite people say that some things, and they are dark, but I think maybe it's partly to do with, like, when you're writing it, you know what's going to happen, so you're in control of it, and it's probably a little bit harder for people reading it in a way. I always remember a friend of the family when she read the first one, she said she had to. There's one bit that's really quite, terrifying, and she had to hold her husband's hand as she was reading it. Like, she gets in, is it going to be okay? Is it going to be okay? And I felt really terrible. Like, I put this.
So my friends would say the same thing especially with my first one. They were like, I can't read it at night time. I'm really sorry, I've tried, but I have to wait for the daytime. And I'm like, oh, good. I'm glad it scared you, but I don't think it's that scary, is it? I don't know.
Mm. I definitely agree with that, because on audio, don't listen to them at night sometimes. It doesn't work.
I was writing one time when my husband was away from home, and I
don't know whether that's
playing around what would happen if you invasion, and it was about 11:30 at night, and I was writing about someone breaking into your house at night time, and in the end I scared myself so much that I just had to shut it and then not think about it. I terrified myself, and that doesn't normally happen, actually. I'm normally not that scared about my writing, but that frightened me.
Definitely is kind of scary. So it must be important to have a sidekick with a softer side, I think, or a sidekick to help, and that happens in both your series as well, especially with Ermin helping out, and then
I mean, do you have a sidekick with a softer side? Who's Tom Hawkins' sidekick?
I don't know it, because I don't think Sam or Kitty would say they have a soft. I mean, I think Tom,
softer side or darker side. You need a sidekick anyway.
Yeah, I mean, Tom's probably the softest of the three.
Yeah,
actually quite a sweetheart. He kind of pretends that he's this, devil may care kind of libertine loose guy, but actually underneath it all, he's a sweetheart. That's kind of his downfall. Sometimes he's a bit too, rushes in to help people without maybe thinking first.
Is Sam who Tom met in prison? Is that
Sam is
his ward? Is that right?
Ward, yeah. He's the nephew of
the nephew, okay.
The devil in the Marshalsea, who is the kind of one of the antagonists in the first one. So Sam is this quite young. The first thing he actually does is rob Tom in an alley. He leads him into an alley to be robbed. In this. So he's it's both literally and sort of figuratively luring him into the darkness. But they kind of play off each other, and they both they become almost brothers, really. That's how they see each other now. They're very protective of one another. So it's quite, again, to go back to what I was saying about writing children, it's that thing of developing relationships,
I think, I mean, with mine, because my first two are a duology, and then The Neighbours a standalone. When I Was 10 is a standalone, although you often see kind of characters popping up. If you're a close reader of my books, you'll always find a reference to one character from another book, if you look hard enough. But so I don't write a series in the same way that you do, but I do go back to characters. But I think you're right, Alex. I think having the dynamic between whoever you're, whether it be a police officer or a journalist or or whatever, it's really important to have a dynamic with another character that is interesting, that's almost like a kind of a subplot or a different thread to the story to kind of give it a bit of light and shade as well.
I found really important with your first book, because of course it's so dark, with the main character having disability as well.
Well, and in its very first kind of, in its earliest form, every single character died, and when people read it, they were like, it's a bit dark. There needs to be some sense of redemption. And I was like, really no, I like dark. And then actually, obviously, as I've become a more experienced writer, I suppose I realize that there is always a need for a little light, against the shade, I suppose. I mean, you can't have a book that is so dark. There needs to be moments of levity and lightness, and that's something I think I've learned a bit as I've gone along, and hopefully become a more experienced and better writer.
Yeah. What would you say is the lightest parts of your books, Antonia?
The lightest parts, did you say?
Yeah.
Lightest part. A really interesting question. I think some of the kind of more incidental characters. I'm not going to say minor characters because I said there are none. Just wriggling out that one. But sometimes some of the other characters that come along, and in this latest one, there's a character called Finbar Inchguard, who's this sort of really
great name there again.
No, he's this sort of really hapless, tempted robber. He's just really, he sort of trips over his own feet. He's incredibly, badly coordinated, and so I guess sometimes with those characters you kind of get a bit of a relief. But I have always felt that, even when you're writing quite dark things, I mean, this is true in life, as we know, that there's always humor, even in the darkest moments that we go through. There's always humor, and there's always some moment there, or of connection between people. So, even in when I was writing The Devil in the Marshalsea, which was set in such an appalling, real place where things really were horrific. The diaries from the time, that I based some of the material, the book on, it was still full of people. People were still living their lives, even in the most extreme circumstances. They were still even having silly feuds and things like that. So yeah. But
it's like paramedics or police officers or firefighters. They all say the same, that they use humor as a way to deflect the darkness, because actually, if you really focus on the fact that you've just dealt with some horrific car accident or a terrorist attack or a tragedy, a tsunami, a volcano, whatever it is, or shooting, that you have to have those moments of lightness, otherwise you just wouldn't be able to cope. And I think that's very reflective of characters like that, of police officers and doctors or whatever. To some it might appear as being flippant, but actually it's how they cope with the darkness that they face day in, day out. And it's good to get some of that in the fiction as well, I think.
Yeah. Going back to the start of your series, as you both written before, what would you say you learned about writing from that?
What have I learned? I think probably, you don't need excess words or puffing. Actually, you can convey an image just as powerfully without lots of fancy writing, and keeping it simple, or using words in an interesting way, that so you don't automatically reach for the most obvious cliche or the most obvious comparison or whatever, simile, whatever. You think really carefully about what you're writing, and I think that's something that I hopefully am trying to do better as my kind of writing career progresses, to think much more carefully about the language that I use, to make sure characters aren't caricatures, that there's more depth to them, but also writing what you love and what you want to write, because you can't be half-hearted about a book. You can't, you have to be wanting to write, because otherwise it becomes the most arduous chore if you're doing something that you're not fully committed to. I mean, writing is, sitting down and writing a book, it takes actually a lot of self-discipline. I'm not very good at self-discipline, but I mean, obviously I've managed to do 4.5 books so far, so but it takes, you have to make yourself do it even when you don't want to do it. So you have to be writing a book that you are enjoying, I think. What do you reckon, Antonia?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I suppose one thing much like when I wrote The Devil in the Marshalsea, I wanted it to be really twisty, and I wanted you to not know, like, who this character is, and maybe they're, maybe it could be they, could be the baddie, and all these sort of different red herrings, and it was quite a challenge. It's sort of structurally, just to make that, and I'm glad I did it. But I think I'm moving more, particularly with this one, more to like perhaps a sort of more simple plot in some ways, or certainly I'm not saying we'd never do a twisty one again. And there are twists in this latest one, but I suppose I was really trying to reach for sort of a real emotional kind of connection and sort of power that perhaps I hadn't been able to quite reach before. That was certainly an intention.
Yeah, I think I was just about to say, because I think, and I've heard this, that especially in your early books, there's an instinct to throw everything into your books because that's what you can do, and you think that's what you need to do. But exactly as Antonia said, actually, it is, as we were talking about earlier, it's character who's much more memorable than plot. So you're right, perhaps having a more simplistic plot, but much more powerfully wrought, I suppose, makes it a more memorable book. I don't know.
I think sometimes what you think, oh, it's simple, and it's not actually. It's when people are reading it, they don't know what's going to happen. So I suppose with this one, people, it's still got a kind of, as I say, it's still got twists going on in it, but it's perhaps a bit more linear. I don't know. I don't know.
I've thought of something else, Alex, that I'm never ever using timestamps at the beginning of each chapter again, because I often do date and then time, and it is the most I've got in the most horrendous muddles doing that. Because if I'm giving editorial notes and then I have to tweak something, and then it has a knock-on effect on every single thing that happens throughout the book, and even when you've checked and rechecked and checked a gazillion times, I've still had editorial notes saying, well, this time is here and this time is here. So actually you said it's 6 hours, but by my calculations, it's 17 and a half. And you're like, no, please. And it's given me complete nightmares. So yeah, in my current book I'm writing, there are no timestamps, and it's very liberating.
Yeah. I'm trying to do that with my own stuff at the moment, and I write a scene and then I shuffle it and try and write a book that way, and timestamps will be a nightmare for me. But,
it's one of the things, I think, when I previous to being a full-time writer, I was an editor as well, and it always it makes my brain slow down. Hang on a minute, if they're over there and then that person's over there, it's the worst. So yeah, it's a good generally I always keep saying to myself, I'm going to do a timeline this book. I'm going to write down religiously.
I start with good intentions and then I just get carried away, and then I'm like, oh no, I wish I'd done my timeline after all.
Do you think a timeline would help with you? Because it's historical, Antonia, do you think that would help more? Or
it's not so much that it's because it's historical. I mean, usually the books, they tend to happen over a reasonably small amount of time, although this fourth one slightly longer. But yeah, it probably would help me. I don't know why. I'm just resistant in a stupid way to anything that's too rigid, which is, even though it would help me.
Do you do a plan when you write a book?
No, I do the sort of, obviously, the character work, and then I know exactly what's going to happen at the end, pretty much, and I know points in between.
And that's another similarity we share then, because I don't plan in any way, and pretty much I normally know how it's going to end, and I know sort of a couple of things, major plot points, but I don't know any more than that. But and I've said this before, that I think it would just bore me rigid if I wrote a really detailed plan. I wouldn't actually want to write the book then.
Absolutely the same. Absolutely the same. It works brilliantly. There's no right or wrong.
I mean, I'm quite envious of people that can do it, because I think then you've got your plan, you've got your map, but I just can't do it myself. Or maybe I'm just really lazy and I can't be bothered.
I don't think you're lazy. Book having
I'd never be able to do it because I write with 4 people and I dictate everything.
Yeah. So how do you write your books then?
I dictate it to my assistants, and then because I'm dictating it and it's never secret, it changes before it's even got to the page. So
Right. Okay.
when you guys get editors, I've already been editing my books as I go. So when I finally get an editor from a publisher, it'll be a nightmare because that'll be another voice involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that.
Right,
Yeah,
you never know.
it won't be easy. Yeah, but hopefully when I get there, because they've got an experience in how to structure a crime book, whereas I'm just doing it off the cuff, it'll hopefully get more structured that way.
But you read so much, Alex, so I would think that you probably naturally absorb some of that. You know, you read all of those books, and I think, you know, one of the key things when you become a writer is having been, I mean, most of the writers that I know have been voracious readers throughout their whole life. I think you subconsciously absorb a lot of stuff.
Oh, you do, yeah. Because that's how I managed to notice the similarities between both of you, because I've been reading that, and I've managed to read nearly all your series. So
Wow.
so, you know.
Oh, thank you.
And it's been a real interesting thing today because it's the first time I've done it trying to compare what most people would consider to be opposite ends of the genre, which we've just proven that's not entirely true.
Yeah.
Oh, well, look, Caroline's asked a question. She says, what locations do you use for your novels and why did you choose them? Do you want to take that one?
I mean, with my first book, it was, I knew that, you know, this kind of character who'd come down to London and was trying to reinvent himself, and then ends up being thrown into a debtor's prison. And that prison really existed. And as I said earlier, there were these diaries, and it became a kind of real scandal about how it was run. And in fact, the keeper eventually got put on trial for murder because of his treatment of the prisoners there. So that was a very specific location, and I stayed in London for the second one, but then I had a really strong urge to move out for the third. I just felt there's something, when you're writing a series in particular, I think you really want to to move out. But then you were saying the same, weren't you, Fiona, that you know you moved sort of location. There's something I think in you that kind of wants to explore something a bit different. So the third one was set up in Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire, which also meant that I could go and research up there and spend time there. Scones in the National Trust cafe. So that was the main.
Yeah, anything that involves a trip is always good, I think.
Actually, it was lovely going up there. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I went to visit the Poison Garden in is it near Alnwick Castle? Now where is the Poison Garden? It's completely gone out of my head now. Anyway, that's really fascinating place to visit where it's pardon?
My computer's just gone powered down. It's going to power down in a minute, so I'm going to hopefully get it plugged in before it.
Okay. Yeah, that was really good. But for my books, I suppose I'm often driven by where I'm living as well. So my first book was set kind of in and around Blackheath because that's where I was living at the time, and I was quite interested in that part of London. And then I moved down to Essex and near the coast. And then, so my books kind of feature quite a lot of, I suppose, the Essex coast and little towns in Essex and things as well. I like to, I suppose, write about, well, we've discussed it before, I think, but how setting is really important because it's almost like an additional character, isn't it? You can create so much from where you set your book. Some of my books are set by the water, but in a place called Old Lee, which is very kind of atmospheric with cockle sheds and a big wide sky. And, I love that kind of just that setting and, the quality of light that you get when, it's dusk over a large body of water, that kind of thing. So I think you can do a lot with that. And so I try and think about that as well. And I mean, in The Neighbour, it was, it had to be a suburb, the book I'm writing at the moment is set in a very, very affluent community, which has been fun in itself, kind of exploring that. So think carefully about where we set them, I think.
It looks like you've got a comment, Fiona.
Oh, look, hang on. Yes, well, I think it's the journalist in me, actually. I like to make sure my books are as accurate as possible. I did quite a lot of research. I spoke to somebody who used to work in that field, who kind of fact checked it a little bit for me, but I did quite a lot of research myself. I was very careful because I think there's a lot, television has a lot to answer for, doesn't it? It's like when you always see in court novels and people are shouting objection and things like that, and that doesn't actually happen, or so I think I was very careful to make it as accurate as possible because I wanted it to feel accurate. And yeah, I did quite a lot of research. I did, but I can't say any more than that, really, apart from having very helpful people. Having been a journalist, you kind of, I've met a lot of useful people who are still very kind and helpful. So and when I wrote The Neighbour, it's got a post-mortem scene in it, and there was an amazing forensic pathologist who read that and made sure I almost went to a post-mortem. It was approved by the coroner, but then it kind of it got blocked at the last minute, but I found a really, really amazing pathologist who read it and helped me make it as accurate as possible. I think it's not even that it has to be 100% right. I just think it has to feel like it might be right. And that's the key thing. I wouldn't want someone to read it and think this is so way off beam. I don't know where she got this from. But yeah, that's made me feel really happy. So thank you for that. It doesn't say who sent the message. So anyway, thank you, whoever you are.
I suppose yeah.
You made me feel better about it, because I was a bit nervous about that, but I wanted to make sure it was right, without making it boring and getting bogged down too much in acronyms and things like that, but trying to get it right. Yeah, but it's amazing what you can find on the internet as well if you search in the right places, though.
When it comes to the historical side, and the fact that you talk about real people that are actually from the time, is how important is accuracy in your books, Antonia, when it comes to that?
Yeah, I mean, I do really try. The characters that I've had that are real, then they're very rarely, with one exception, they're very rarely sort of really big public figure, really, really, famous. From I don't do sort of, take really famous characters and sort of pop them in there and go, oh look, there's so and so. They're people that I'm particularly interested in exploring, and they could be quite obscure now. So there's a character in the two of the books, book 2 and in this latest one, he was a magistrate, and he was very interested in what he called morals or manners, which he meant as being morals, and he had this society for the reformation of manners, and would go around sort of sending people, informers, into brothels and things like that, and into molly houses, which were gay places where gay people would come together, and basically he was very overzealous, shall we say, in sort of punishing people in a way that I found quite creepy, and you start to sort of you read it up about a character and about this person's biography, and you have to some extent fill in the gaps yourself and make certain.
Is that hard though? Because that's what always sort of scares me about even attempting historical fiction, would be sort of trying to make that kind of leap, and then I don't know, do you find that really difficult? Or?
I try really hard to be responsible with it, and I would never just sort of take a character and go, oh yeah, they did all these horrendous things. It's always very, very much based on what I do know about them, and I research them as closely as I can. So in the third book, there's a character called John Aislabie, who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he was very corrupt, basically. There's a shortcut to it, but at the same time, he had other redeeming qualities. He was very, really adored his family, and so I always try to put both sides where I can. And yeah, definitely. I always feel, even though they're long dead, I do feel a responsibility. I would never just take a character and then use them in some other way to make the plot move along.
How long do you spend on your research before you start writing? Sorry, Alex, I'm really interested in this though. So
no problem, go for it. It's fine.
You know, I mean, when I wrote the first one, I did quite a lot of initial research about just the way people live their lives and the clothes and all of those things, so that I top up. But then the specifics, yeah, I would say, you know, maybe, I don't know, a couple of months, 2-3 months, just sort of purely, you know, going through the primary and secondary sources.
And do you have like a Bible of all the stuff that you've already researched, so you don't have to go back? Because it must be difficult to remember all of it. So do you kind of have like a reference book in some ways that you just that you've created yourself that you constantly refer back to?
I refer you back to my earlier
about timelines.
Fiona, I was really interested in the fact that in the first book you decided to create a museum of unusual people. Of course, that's historical too. So, was there any historical basis for that choice? Or...
The Hunterians, you mean? Yeah. So in Rattle, in my debut novel, my serial killer, his kind of modus operandi, I suppose, is he's a collector of medical oddities. So he chooses his victims based on disabilities or kind of any kind of medical oddity they might have, and he starts his own home museum. I think, no, I was interested. I kind of stumbled across the Hunterian and I was fascinated by, well, I went and had a look round and it was just so inspiring. I think that probably says a lot about me, because I would spend ages like looking at a syphilitic nose or something, or, you know, I don't know, kind of all sorts of, you know, I think there was a teeth from the, you know, taken from the battlefields of Waterloo and all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, and a guy who suffered from, you know, so it's a very contentious issue. So it's colloquial. The condition colloquially is sometimes called Stone Man syndrome, but some people find that very offensive. Its real name is fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, FOP. And there was a exhibit who suffered from that, and so that was a kind of real. Two things happened. I kind of went to the Hunterian and saw that kind of exhibit, and then I read an article about a young boy who was suffering from the same condition, and the kind of two became melded. And actually I ended up speaking to the father of the boy who suffered from that condition, who was brilliant and who really loved the book. And I think so I have had you know, the odd message from people saying that they find using the phrase Stone Man syndrome really offensive, but the father of the young boy who suffered from it that I spoke to was relaxed about it and really thought the book did a great deal of kind of justice to it. So I was pleased about that, because, you know, he was someone who actually lived with it day in, day out. But yeah, I mean, I think there's so many interesting kind of little known places to discover, and it's nice to put them in your books.
The first things you did as writers, because I wouldn't have known about Fiona if it wasn't for New Blood. So, what's the most? Would you say is the most key thing you remember as a writer? What's the first thing you remember?
So the most important, like significant thing, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember. So I knew that my book had been submitted for consideration for the New Blood panel at Theakston's, but I didn't know if it would be Val McDermott's cup of tea or not. And then I remember I was picking my daughter up from Rainbows, I think it was, and I had a tweet from Val and it just said wow or something. And I was, you know, that thing where you always doubt yourself, and I was like, well, what is she talking about, my book, or has she sent it to me by accident? Or what? I didn't know, because I didn't know that she'd read it. And what I didn't know at that time was that she'd emailed my editor to say how much she'd enjoyed it, and very generously and kindly. And she's such an advocate for, you know, new writers. She'd given a quote for the cover and everything. But I didn't know any of that at the time. So I literally just had this tweet from her that said, wow. So I was like, I was just like, thank you. But I didn't know what I was saying thank you for. But yeah, I mean, her loving the book and then giving me a place on that panel. I think it was just, I mean, that for me is the, still remains probably the highlight, the most memorable thing, because as a new writer, it felt like a validation, I suppose. It felt like someone, whose opinion I really respect, loved what I'd done. And that, that still feels amazing now, 4 or 5 books in, and she continues to be so supportive. And I know she has sometimes recommended my books to other people, and and she's just brilliant. She's and I'm forever grateful for that, I think.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's a similar thing. I think it's that first time someone who isn't in any way connected to you, or has any kind of even, I mean, obviously getting a publisher is in itself like just a joy and so exciting. But beyond that, I think it was when I got my first advance quote, and it was from Jeffrey Deaver, who I have absolutely no connection to, didn't know at all, and it just came through, and it was such love, and it was a lovely quote as well. And I was like, some, maybe
it's okay.
maybe there's some merit to what I'm doing, and I always remember that. And the crime writing community is so supportive in that way. I think it's a really lovely aspect of the genre, I find.
I think so, because I think most of us recognize that actually with crime readers, they're not going to just buy one book, they're going to buy several books. I don't feel in competition with people. I really would love to kind of lift up other writers as much as you can, because there's plenty of readers to go round, and I like belonging to a community that's really supportive, and that throws the ladder back down, as it were, and is always moves aside to make room for you, with not pushing you out. And I think that's really amazing. And much the same as Antonia, every time I got a quote from somebody that I didn't know and who has no obligation to quote or anything, was just like it was such a thrill, isn't it? I mean, even now it's still a real thrill to get a quote in from someone who's enjoyed your writing. I mean, it's the best feeling.
If we've got any final questions in the audience, it's 8 o'clock now, so we're nearly on time. It doesn't appear as if we have, so probably going to close there. Yeah. I'll just say thank you very much to both of you for making it a really interesting evening.
Well, thank you for inviting us to take part.
Thank you so much.
It's been a real interesting kind of challenge to prove to myself that the book world is more similar than we think. Oh, yeah.
And what you've done is made me really want to read Antonia's books now as well. So you've done a good job, Alex.
We each got.
Glad, yeah. Good.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.